Tonight, Dr. Craig Hamby, our Executive Director of Elementary Education, and Dr. Jill Lawson, our Executive Director of Assessment and Student Services, are going to go through the updated data regarding FastBridge and NWEA. So I'm going to turn it over to Craig to start.
Thank you, Tara. So I'll begin by speaking about our FastBridge winter screenings, and then about halfway through, I'll turn over to Jill to talk about NWEA. So quick reminder, in case anyone forgot, we have been dealing with COVID-19 this school year, so nothing's been normal. So just a reminder, as we look at our results, some of our students have taken the assessments virtually, some of our students have been hybrid, some in person. The amount of days that kids have been in person, just so many variables that teachers and students have dealt with this year. Just something to keep in mind. Understanding FastBridge scores. So some of our scores are benchmark, FastBridge benchmarks, and some of them are national norms as we go through. And then the tests that we're looking at, when we're in kindergarten first, we'll be looking at early reading scores. When we transition to second and third grade, we move to A reading, which kind of takes the place of the early reading. And then we have CBM, which is really a decoding or reading words test for that. So kindergarten, the subtests that they have on their early reading are nonsense words, word segmenting, letter sounds, and onset sounds. So with kindergarten, this is information, hopefully I didn't go too far. I actually shared this with you, I think it was in January, at the January board meeting, maybe February, I can't remember which one. So this isn't anything new, but I thought I'd throw it back in here just so we'd have everything together. But one thing I wanted to point out, we had mentioned the last time we looked at this kindergarten data was, this year was kind of comparable to 2 years ago, the first year that we used the FastBridge screener. But one thing to make note of is back in 18-19, we had 37% at high risk, and this winter with our kindergartners, that was down to 26. So even though the overall 31 and 36 that were above out of the risk category, we had a lot fewer students in the high risk category this winter. So just something to take note of. Then as we move into first grade, the early reading test, once again, nonsense words, word segmenting, sight words, and CBM. So this is that oral reading fluency where the students are just reading a passage and they're seeing how many words they can read correctly in 1 minute. So what you see on this chart, we have the winter of 1920. So it's the first graders when they were in kindergarten, last winter, 1 year ago. Then their fall score, and then their winter score now. So 58% above benchmark this time last year. In the fall, 51, and then currently 50% above the benchmark for first grade. This is just representing those same numbers in graphic form, but as you can see, not too much difference between our fall and our winter scores. Almost exactly the same as they were in the fall. We screened in the winter. So it'll be interesting to see what things look like in the spring after we've had a full year of instruction. So looking at early reading in first grade from year to year. So we were 55% last year's first graders, and this year's first graders are at 50%. So I won't, I want to say it's a different year this year. There's two different things we're looking at, but I'm pretty proud of those kids to hold it even at 50, even be close to where we were last year with all the challenges that they've had to deal with since the fourth quarter of last year. As we move into second grade, now second grade we start to switch. We take A reading, which is kind of a general, all kinds of general reading skills that the kids take in an adaptive test. And they also take the CBM, which once again is the oral reading fluency test. So here with our second graders, you can see winter, when they were in first grade 1 year ago, 87% above benchmark. And then they were 74% in the fall and at 76% now. So a little gain from the fall to now. It's hard to compare against last year. And then as they get into the CBM, the oral reading fluency, in the same ballpark, 82% last year and 76% this year. As we look from year to year, last year's second graders were at 68% above benchmark, and this year's second graders in the winter at 63%. Moving on to third grade. Third grade does the exact same battery of tests as second grade does. So our current third graders, when they were in second grade in the winter, 69%. This fall, they were at 74%, and then at 71% here in the winter of third grade. Now, one thing we want to say is that I felt it was, can I go back here? My second grade CBM fell from, let me see if I can find it. And I'll find it in a little bit and tell you what it is. One of our second grade, in the high risk, we were last year at 19% and fell to 7% this year. So even though they're not above the benchmark out of the risk category, we moved a lot from the high risk to the some risk category. And let's see, so that's our cohort comparison I just talked about. Here it is graphically. You can see the numbers. Not a lot of change. Third grade's been holding steady, if not more so. And then our third grade year-to-year comparison. Last year in the winter, third grade 69%, and this year in the winter, third grade has actually improved with a better score than what they had last year. The CBM, last year when these students were in second grade, 78% above the benchmark. And the fall, they were at 83%, and they're at 82% here in the winter, but still better growth from where they were last year in the winter. So third grade doing outstanding regardless of the situation that they've had to deal with this year. And then our graph, you can see steady growth across the years. I guess the main thing to take away from this is you want to be in the blue. The blue is where you want to be, and we have a giant bar of blue out there for our third graders. So very good to see that. And our year-to-year comparison, last year's third graders were at 84% above benchmark, and this year in the winter, 82%. So holding steady, all things considered, for our third graders. So that wraps up the data from FastBridge. Before we move to NWEA, what questions might you have?
I have two. I know that kind of when we started using FastBridge, it seemed like we were using a few different tests here and there. And so have we kind of found the ones we're sticking with and we're planning to use those unless we find something better?
We've settled in nicely. I think we started off with early read auto reading, and then we moved to A reading. We might move to a more comprehensive where it includes both of those next year, but it will still be comparable numbers because we'll have both tests.
Okay.
So we won't be subtracting anything that we can't compare. So I think we've settled into what we're going to be using.
All right, and then my other one is I know that we offer the FastBridge if like parent or teacher referral for above third grade. Do we not have a large enough sample size to really report on that?
We have the number, we have the data. I could pull that, but it's just a handful of students.
Okay, I was just curious. Thanks.
Any other questions for FastBridge?
Was there anything new or different? I believe we added some different changes to our curriculum, or we added a new program, minus COVID. Could we see any positive effects in that?
So I think you started to see a lot of positive effects last year. So some of those numbers that looked awesome last year, and it looks like we stepped back a little bit. Our hope is to get back to that next year.
Right.
But I do believe Sunday we have a phonics or word work program K through 5 that's consistent through all the grade levels, which is definitely going to help. And then a big piece that was missing was the phonemic awareness piece. So K and 1 use Haggerty now, which was kind of absent from our instruction beforehand. So that's going to help out tremendously also.
Okay.
So, this year was kind of going all the way back to exactly 1 year from now. It's been kind of a curveball, but I'd like to see how the numbers pan out over the next couple of years to see the true picture.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to share with you the winter NWEA map growth results. So in the fall when I spoke at the board workshop, all I really had was performance data. But now that we have 2 data points, we can incorporate the growth data into our presentation. So that's really what it's going to be about tonight. So hopefully this works. All right, so here you'll see 2 charts. I just copy and pasted up here. And this is from NWEA. And these charts are where we go to look at the different norms and the means for each of the fall, winter, or spring assessment windows. So as you can see to the left, I don't know if you can see it very well, but to the left we have the grade level, and then going across the winter mean and the spring mean. And they also include the standard deviation for those as well. But this is looking at, so what I want to just illustrate is that we're in that winter window right now. So that is where we are referencing our different means for our students depending on their grade level. So I have an example of reading and math up here as well. So when a student takes the NWEA MAP assessment, it's a through course assessment. So it is completely adaptive. And it really will just kind of goes to illustrate, if a student is taking a test and answering the questions, and the green representing the students who are answering the questions correctly, the level of difficulty of the next question will go up. And if they get a question wrong, it will start to go down. And so what it means, what that RIT level really means is, the RIT score is the level of difficulty at which a student is able to answer 50% of the questions correctly. So that is how the assessment identifies that exact RIT level, that RASH unit, the scale score that a student will have based on their level of difficulty. They start to answer their questions, and where they start to get to that 50% correctly, that's where the test begins to end. Student, and that identifies their actual scale score. So for the MAP test, it's not for the NWEA MAP test, and they call it MAP, so that's when I refer to them, not referring to the Missouri Assessment Plan. This is far superior to that. But what I would say is that when a student is getting a RIT score, it's not necessarily giving them a level of mastery, it's giving them it's identifying what exactly they know based on the questions they answer, but where they're ready to go in their learning. So when we're looking at standards-based and competency-based and learning through a continuum, this assessment helps to support that idea of, let's find out where a student is and where they're ready to go next, and not necessarily where they are per their grade level. Because as we know, we serve students who are going to be below and above, and we want to make sure we're able to give them good instruction either way. So going to the next slide here, if I were a teacher, I didn't turn it off, I promise. It seems like I did. Okay, there we go. So if I were a classroom teacher, how I would take these scores and relate them to what I'm going to do in the classroom is I would look at this particular report that's on NWEA. And up at the top is a level of RIT bands, and they're set in 10. So teachers can go in and identify where their students scored by their particular level and say, this is where our students are ready to learn, and particular skills and topics will go on. But why this is so good is because to the left of the skills that show up in the center are the skills the students are ready to go. They're ready to learn. They're ready to develop at that level. But there are some times where students still need a little reinforcement, or we might want to challenge a student and give them give them some skills that are beyond where they are particularly scoring here. So what it does is it gives skills that teachers can reinforce and skills students are ready to develop, and also skills that teachers can start to introduce the challenges to they want to go to the next level in their learning. So getting to the performance, this is the performance data. So if we look to the left, we have the grade, and then we have in the gray the fall NWEA RIT mean, then the fall Lindbergh Schools RIT mean, and then winter NWEA RIT mean, and then the winter Lindbergh Schools mean RIT, I should say, so sorry. But what you can see is that going all the way down from 4th to 8th grade, we see that we are very, very close to the mean, to the mean RIT. And being that these particular scores are pre-pandemic scores, and our students have half of the instruction that they have had, that they are so close. So looking at this, you would say, well, the students are doing pretty decent. We're going to get to some growth data that shows the impact of the students not being in person to the same amount that they were in the past. But you can see when it comes to the performance, the students are staying close to the average score. That's for mathematics. So I'm just going to kind of hold it up there just a little bit. In almost every grade level except for fourth grade, and this was the same in the fall, we were 1 point short of the mean. I swear I'm not turning that off. I don't know why it's doing that. It's like, maybe I should have you do it. I'm going to go back and then I'm going to barely touch it. Okay, so that's mathematics. Going to reading here. Our reading scores are above the mean. But I'm going to show you how, even though we have made it to the, we're in that average, that 50, that mean, that 50%, we did not in many areas, and I'll show you, meet the growth that was projected for reading. And in some cases, mathematics too. So that's why this test, we may have growth, but according to the pre-pandemic norms, we didn't, and what was projected, we didn't meet the projected growth. Our observed growth didn't meet the projected growth. And so I'll show you an example of what that looks like here. In just a minute. Before I get to the growth data, I wanted to just let you all know that we did, the NWEA has a language assessment as well, and we are doing a pilot assessment. We have one grade level from every building, 4th through 8th grade, who participate, one classroom per grade level in each building participate. And so there's no on this particular assessment. It's just performance data right now because we just started doing it in the winter. But as far as language goes, we have our winter norm for NWEA and our Lindbergh Schools norm for see how we performed. In some cases, extremely close and a few points higher in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Okay, so here we have our reading assessment scores. And so to the left, starting on the left, we have the grade, the fall RIT score, the winter RIT score. Those are for our district, the observed growth, and then the projected growth. So every grade level has a projected growth, and it's high when you're very, very low as you get as you get into the higher grades. So in kindergarten, according to NWEA, you could grow 10, 11 points from one window to the next, but as you get into 12th grade, it may be a RIT score. So because as you get older, you start putting in more applications. So for this particular assessment, or for fall to winter growth, we see that we did make some growth in every area. However, it didn't meet the projected growth that was expected by the pre-pandemic norms that were set. So 4th grade observed growth 3, projected growth was 5.6. 5th grade observed growth 2, projected growth was 4.5. In 6th grade, the observed growth was 2 and projected 3.4. In 7th, the observed growth was 2 and the projected was 2.7. And in 8th grade, the observed growth was 1, but the projected was 2.4. And as you look, those projected growth numbers go down as the grade levels go up, as I just mentioned. And so you can see where we had our least amount of growth, obviously, is in 4th grade reading here. And our most amount of growth was in 7th grade. When we get into math, we're closer to our projected growth rates. So for 4th grade, observed growth was 6. The projected growth, oh my gosh, I'm moving the wrong one. Okay, that thing went. So in 6th grade, the observed growth was 6. The projected growth was 6.5. So we were that 0.5 away from meeting our target. In 5th grade, observed growth is 5, and the projected growth was 5.7. In 6th grade, observed was 3, and the projected growth was 4.9. And in 7th grade, our observed growth was 4, projected was 3.9. So we were there, we were right there, 0.1 above. And in 8th grade, the observed growth was 3, and the projected growth was 3.2. So as you can see by the visual as well, that 6th grade made the least amount of, even though they did show some growth, they did not meet that pre-pandemic projected growth, and so they, of all of our math scores, missed it the most. But 8th grade was the closest to, or 4th grade surpassed it, and 8th grade was the close, almost there.
Dr. Larson?
Yes.
I think you answered this, but on the growth, the projected growth is from NWEA. That's not a district set growth. Is that right?
That is an NWEA.
Okay,
yes.
based
And
on
that's
like what should
normed.
happen in an educational system. Okay. Thank
So,
you.
and that is NWEA's mean growth. So that means any student that shows at least that percent will show 50%, or will be in the 50th percentile of growth. So that is how that is set. So anybody that shows, students individually made way more growth than that, and some made just a point. So, but that is the standard normed growth rate. And I'm sorry I was missing the projections on these. So really what I wanted to just, I'm missing the clicker on this. But one of the things I just wanted to show here is we will be moving to those spring norms. And one of the things that's going to happen here is there is a trend of not as much growth from winter to spring, but we're still going to hope to just make that not true and just keep pushing through. We do hope that we have the least disruption between winter and spring, so we can maximize all of our instructional time to really do what matters and make sure our kids are closing those gaps for students.
I think one of the things that's really important about this data is it's changing the way we're talking about student learning. So when we're starting to have conversations with teachers, like this is still very, very new for our teachers. So getting used to the platform of looking at this data, how do I use this data, how does it impact learning? And I think it's really important, as Jill referenced, in a COVID year, so many of our instructional practices look very different. The small group instruction that we would typically do and use this data to impact, really accelerating student learning, that isn't happening in the same way. So we have not just the changes in instructional time within our schools, but also the changes in our strategies. So in a lot of ways, this data is, I feel like in some ways it's serendipitous to do this in a pandemic for many reasons. One, we actually get to see what the impact is on students and how we can close those gaps for the future. But the other part is it's giving us time to really understand what is the tool, so that when we are in a traditional learning experience, learning environment, we can accelerate how we use it that much better.
The one last part of the thing I just wanted to mention is that after each of these benchmark windows, fall, winter, and spring, we're having one-on-one, we're meeting with principals and their coaches and assistant principals to review the data, discuss changes that need to take place, and things that we can take away from it. We have our strengths, we have our areas of concern that we want to work on. But from there, they are going to their PLCs, their grade level teams, and talking with them about the data. There's been a lot of conversations about data this year, and teachers really digging into the results. The information that comes from NWEA and how to read the data is really making some great changes with the conversations that are happening in PLCs.
So the thing I would say about this, if you think about the conversations we've been having around student achievement the last 3 years, it's been about growth. And this is the instrument that is going to allow us. So we're rolling this out in, like Tara said, a pandemic learning environment. And what's exciting about this, it's no longer about in the spring, did my kid score proficient? And If they didn't, then, we're going to go on to the next level of standards, grade level of standards. If they didn't meet proficient in third grade, well, we're going to move them to fourth grade. This is about growth throughout the entire year, that a parent can have an ongoing conversation with their teacher, and their teacher can drill down with these reports to be able to say, look at where we started, point A to point B, we're not where that kid needs to be, but man, look at the growth we've accomplished. And that's really going to be powerful. And as we learn to use this instrument, I think you're really going to see our student achievement really grow. And the fact that our numbers are right there, kind of with the national norm scores that were, correct me if I'm wrong, set in 2018. Is that when they?
Created in 2018 and released in 2020.
Yeah, so again, this different learning environments there. So I feel, yes, we got room to grow and whatever, but I feel like we got a really good baseline in a very challenging learning environment for all, that I think Craig made the point. It's going to be exciting in the next 24 months, 18 months to kind of see how much of that gap have we really closed and accelerated our kids. So we're super excited about this instrument, so.